The atmosphere in the international summit was tense, the air thick with expectation. Delegates from around the world filled the grand hall, their murmurs fading as Vance, freshly polished in his tailored navy suit, stepped to the podium. He scanned the crowd with steely eyes, then let his gaze settle on a single man, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, seated calmly in the second row, his presence unshaken, his military uniform speaking louder than any speech. Vance leaned forward and spoke into the mic, his voice firm but laced with disdain. "Some people," he said, without naming names, "don't belong on this stage. Leadership is earned, not taken with theatrics." The word struck like a slap. Cameras swung toward Traoré. The hall went silent. Slowly, Traoré stood. He didn't rush, he didn't flinch. He walked toward the stage with the deliberate pace of a man who'd walked through fire and come out harder. When he reached the podium, he didn't ask. He simply took the mic from Vance, their hands brushing for a split second, ice meeting flame. Traoré's voice cut through the stillness like a blade. "You speak of belonging," he said, scanning the room, "yet your bombs fall where our children sleep. Your aid comes with chains. You speak of leadership, but lead no one but your own fears." A collective breath was held. The room, moments ago hostile, now leaned in. "Where I come from, we don't beg for seats at tables built on stolen gold," Traoré continued. "We build our own." The crowd stirred. Murmurs turned to applause. A delegate from Brazil stood. Then South Africa. Then Chile. Traoré hadn't just answered Vance, he'd eclipsed him. Vance stepped back, his mouth tight, his eyes darting. Traoré hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't needed to. In a single moment, the stage was no longer Vance's, it belonged to Traoré. As the applause echoed through the chamber, Traoré remained still, one hand resting on the edge of the podium, the other clenched loosely at his side. He didn't smile, he didn't gloat. His silence roared louder than any speech. It was the silence of a man who had nothing to prove, because he had already lived the cost of everything said in that room. Vance stepped back into the shadows of the stage, watching his grip on the audience unravel. His earlier words now felt brittle, hollow, like old slogans shouted into a windstorm. A few aides leaned toward him, whispering, but he waved them off. The damage was done. Traoré leaned into the microphone again, his voice calm but unrelenting. "Leadership," he said, "is not about cameras, titles, or stage presence. It is about who stands when everyone else bows. I do not stand here to seek your approval. I stand because my people refuse to kneel." Every word carried weight, not because of theatrical delivery, but because it came from a place no polished politician could fake, conviction earned through struggle. The camera zoomed in, broadcasting Traoré's eyes. Steady, unwavering, across every major outlet. On social media, the moment was already trending. Memes, quotes, live translations. Young Africans tweeted with pride. Latin American leaders retweeted with fire emojis. Even some European journalists dropped their neutrality for a moment to type, "Traoré just changed the game." Back in the room, a murmur spread again, but this time from those who had previously sat in silence. A woman from the South Pacific stood to speak. Then an elder statesman from Namibia nodded slowly. One by one, figures of power began to view Traoré not as a soldier at the wrong summit, but as the voice they'd been waiting to hear. Vance sat down. Traoré didn't. He had more to say. And the world, for the first time in a long time, was ready to listen. When the session broke for recess, reporters swarmed the hallway, but Traoré walked past them without a single word. No comment. No spin. His silence was a statement in itself, and still, the headlines were writing themselves. Inside a side room, Vance was pacing. He tossed a bottled water onto the table, the plastic crinkling under the weight of his frustration. This was supposed to be symbolic, he muttered to his staff. "We show strength, he shows nerves." Simple, but what had unfolded on stage wasn't simple at all. Traoré hadn't just spoken, he had seized the room. And worse for Vance, he had done it without playing by their rules. No script. No teleprompter, just brutal, unshakable truth. Elsewhere, Traoré stood with a few African diplomats, quietly discussing trade agreements and food sovereignty. The mood was calm, but something had shifted. Nations who had long been sidelined were now rethinking their alliances. If one voice could command the UN floor like that, maybe more should. A U.S. delegate approached him cautiously. "There's concern," she said, carefully choosing each word. "Your statements today, they stirred things." Traoré nodded. "Then let them stir. Maybe it's time this house woke up." Back in the assembly, as leaders returned to their seats, they found the air different, charged. The usual formalities felt thinner now, like everyone was waiting for the moment to crack open again. For the truth to walk back in and speak without fear. And as Traoré stepped into the hall once more, the cameras turned automatically. The show wasn't over. The shift had only just begun. The next morning, global headlines didn't carry J.D. Vance's name. They carried his silence. Clips of Traoré's response had gone viral. Broadcasts dissected his tone, his poise, the sheer gravity of his words. Social feeds were flooded with one phrase: he didn't just take the mic. He rewrote the script. At the White House briefing, a reporter asked pointedly, "Does the administration believe J.D. Vance was outmatched yesterday?" The press secretary offered a tight smile. "We're not here to grade performances. But let's just say, the world took notice." In Africa, the streets buzzed, not with protest, but with pride. In Ouagadougou, murals were painted overnight. Kids pointed and shouted, "That's our voice." Traoré's image stood beside Pan-African flags, fists raised, captions reading, "Spoken like a leader." Meanwhile, Vance's team scrambled. "He needs to respond," an aide urged. "Say something, anything." But every drafted statement sounded hollow. Every tweet rehearsed. Nothing matched what Traoré had done, cut through decades of noise with one unscripted truth. Back at the UN, a janitor mopped the echoing halls, pausing near the now empty podium. He shook his head and chuckled. "Funny," he whispered. "Was supposed to be another day of speeches, turned into history." 2 days later, an op-ed appeared in the New York Times. Its title? "The Day the Mic Changed Hands." It wasn't written by a politician or pundit. It was penned by a UN translator who had been in the room when Traoré spoke. She wrote, "I've translated over 700 speeches, calm ones, angry ones, brilliant ones. But I have never felt the floor shake from words alone. Until that moment." J.D. Vance, normally a fixture on primetime panels, was conspicuously absent. When asked for comment, his office released a single-line statement: "Senator Vance stands by his views." It was cold. It was calculated. And it fell flat. On social media, the meme factory exploded. One image stood out, a podium labeled, "Belongs to the Brave," with Traoré's silhouette front and center. The caption? "Mic checkmate." Meanwhile, in a televised address, Traoré didn't mention Vance. Not once. Instead, he spoke of bridges, not stages. Of power that doesn't need permission. And as he concluded, the camera zoomed in, capturing not fire, not fury, but resolve. He ended with 5 words. "We speak, you listen now." And the world did. 3 weeks passed. The headlines had shifted to new scandals, new tensions, new conflicts. But in college campuses across the U.S., posters still hung in student unions and dorm rooms. The image? Traoré, mid-speech, finger pointed, eyes lit. The text? "You don't belong. Watch me lead." At Yale, during a panel titled "Global South and Western Perception," a student raised their hand and asked the guest speaker, a retired ambassador, what he thought of the moment between Vance and Traoré. The ambassador paused. He adjusted his glasses. Then he said, "Sometimes, history doesn't knock. It kicks the door down." That was one of those moments. Back in Burkina Faso, the National Assembly played a recording of Traoré's UN speech before opening their session. Some called it performative. Others called it historic. But no one called it forgettable. In Ohio, a campaign ad aired for Vance's re-election. It tried to pivot. It showed him with veterans, farmers, workers. But the comments section told a different story. Still waiting for that mic drop, Senator. Traoré 1, Vance 0. You spoke first. He spoke better. One voice. One moment. One room that listened. A month after the confrontation, a journalist from The Atlantic published a deep dive titled "The Moment the Room Changed, Traoré, Vance, and the Future of Global Dialogue." It went viral within hours. Clips of Traoré's retort to Vance became a meme among young political activists. One TikTok edit looped his words, "You want silence? Try respect," over dramatic music, cut with reaction shots from stunned diplomats. It amassed 4.2 million views in 3 days. Vance attempted damage control. He issued a statement, vague and deflective. "I stand by what I said. I believe in American leadership." But it backfired. Traoré didn't respond directly. He didn't need to. He went to South Africa instead. Held a summit with young African leaders. Delivered a speech titled, "We Were Never Voiceless." Just ignored. The applause lasted 5 full minutes. That same week, a mural appeared overnight on a wall in Harlem. It showed Traoré standing on a stage, a broken microphone at his feet, painted with the caption, "They said he didn't belong. So he built a new stage." 2 weeks later, the international stage shifted again. The United Nations opened its annual Global Development Forum in Geneva, expecting the usual, long speeches, vague promises, polite applause. But then came the unexpected. Both Traoré and Vance were scheduled to speak, back to back. Security was tightened. Journalists swarmed. Every major network prepped for a showdown. Vance went first. He took the podium with his usual bravado, opened with, "The world needs structure. Order. Leadership, not chaos parading as revolution." He glanced sideways at Traoré, seated in the front row, expression unreadable. Vance continued. "We can't build global prosperity by listening to those who've never built anything at all." There was a murmur in the crowd. When it was Traoré's turn, the lights dimmed. Cameras refocused. Silence fell. He stepped up slowly. No notes. No script. "You say we haven't built," he began. "But your foundations were laid with our stolen labor, your wealth extracted from our soil, your peace funded by our chaos." The hall tensed. "And yet, here I stand, not asking for a seat. Taking it." A pause. "The West says order. We say justice. You say leadership. We say dignity. You say structure. We say, enough." When he finished, he turned without waiting for applause. But the applause came anyway. And it didn't stop. Even the translators paused. Even the cameras shook. The video went viral before the applause even ended. Clips of Traoré standing alone at the podium, no teleprompter, no notes, spread across every major platform. But what happened next wasn't in the script. Later that evening, during a private roundtable on post-conflict economic strategies, J.D. Vance and Traoré were seated at opposite ends of a long, polished table. Representatives from the IMF, EU, and World Bank filled the room. Cameras were banned, but every phone was recording anyway. Vance leaned forward, smirking. "You delivered a good speech, I'll give you that. But this isn't a debate club. You don't change systems by grandstanding." Traoré didn't blink. He didn't smile. "You're right," he said. "I don't change systems by talking. I break them by surviving them. The silence was instant. For generations, we've been told we don't belong at these tables. So we made our own. And now, you're sitting at mine. Someone coughed. A pen dropped. No one dared interrupt. You think power is inherited. We know it's seized. Vance leaned back, trying to laugh, but his eyes didn't match his mouth. Traoré stood. You said I don't belong on this stage. But I'm not on your stage anymore. Then he walked out, alone, again. But this time, half the room stood with him. It wasn't just a summit. It was a standoff. A closed-door session on global security in emerging regions had turned into a verbal battlefield. J.D. Vance, sleeves rolled up, voice louder than protocol allowed, jabbed his finger across the table at Ibrahim Traoré. You bring nothing but resistance and rhetoric. You want to lead Africa? Try listening for once. The room froze. A dozen ambassadors, half a dozen UN officials, and a handful of defense contractors turned to Traoré. He stood up slowly. Calm. Controlled. Unmoved. You mistake resistance for noise. That's your first error. He walked to the center of the room, not asking permission, commanding presence. You say I bring nothing. But I bring the cost. The cost of exploitation. The price of silence. The interest on every decade you called us unstable just so you could intervene. Cameras weren't allowed, but somehow, within minutes, quotes leaked online. You want us to listen? Traoré's voice was steady now. We listened while you shipped our minerals, armed our enemies, and called it development. Vance tried to cut in. You don't get to rewrite history. But Traoré's final line drowned him out. History is written by those who survive. And we're still here. Thunderous silence. One ambassador whispered, he didn't just win the room. He rewrote the agenda. The lights dimmed, not by accident, but by design. The world was watching. The room was full. Not a single empty seat, not a single silent phone. Journalists poised their pens. Delegates held their breath. Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto the stage. No podium. No teleprompter. Just his voice, and the burden of centuries echoing in his lungs. He looked around slowly, locking eyes with representatives from every continent. Then he began. You've all spoken today of peace. Of progress. Of partnership. But your peace is fragile. Your progress is selective. And your partnerships are built on the bones of those you've buried quietly. A ripple moved through the crowd. Some cleared their throats. Some clenched their jaws. Traoré continued, unmoved. Africa has heard your slogans. Democracy. Stability. Reform. You preached these words from air-conditioned halls while our mothers fetched water from poisoned rivers. You gave us aid after you took our oil. You offered loans with one hand while the other tightened the chains. He paused. And when we rose up, when we dared to speak, you labeled us threats. You called us extremists. Militants. Insurgents. But let me make this very clear today, for the last time. We are none of those things. We are what happens when the silence is broken. The chamber fell still. Even the translators hesitated, afraid to break the rhythm of the truth. You celebrated colonizers in your textbooks. You gave them statues, currencies, cities. But we remember the massacres. The stolen names. The languages you banned. The children you took. And now you ask for dialogue? He stepped forward, voice rising like a storm. You want access to our lithium? To our gold? To our rare earths? Then you will hear our terms. No more puppet governments. No more security, cooperation, that sends our people to die in someone else's war. No more trade agreements written in your language, dictated by your banks, enforced by your sanctions. His voice cracked, not with weakness, but with the sheer weight of everything unsaid for generations. You say we are rising. But we were never buried. We were silenced. Distracted. Deceived. And now we are awake. The lights shifted subtly behind him, Africa's map pulsed across the walls in gold. To those who still believe you can threaten us, invade us, coerce us. You are mistaken. This is not the Africa of handouts. This is the Africa of headlines. We don't need your permission to be powerful. A few clapped. Then more. Then the room thundered with applause, but Traoré raised his hand. Silence returned. He delivered the closing line slowly. Deliberately. You may still have your empires. But make no mistake. The age of obedience is over. And the final word will not be whispered by the powerful. It will be shouted by the once oppressed. And this is that word. He turned his back on the applause. He didn't come for praise. He came to end the conversation, with truth.